The bus doors hissed open to cheap red carpet. No marching band. No handshake from Xi Jinping. Just Beijing smog, a huddle of mid-level staffers, and the quiet humiliation of Europe's most powerful leaders being unloaded at the Great Hall like tourists. Ursula von der Leyen walked ahead, jaw set, flanked by aides who understood the optics before the summit even began. This wasn't an oversight. It was the opening statement of a summit that never intended diplomacy. Day 2 was cancelled. Joint press conferences were scrapped. The only item agreed upon was a recycled climate change commitment, a diplomatic placeholder for a meeting that collapsed before it began. According to Reuters, the EU-China goods trade deficit hit €305.8 billion in 2024, nearly double the 2021 level. Europe came to discuss that. Beijing refused to flinch. Xi Jinping's message: Europe needs China, not the other way around. While von der Leyen called for rebalancing, she suggested the EU avoid politicizing trade. He offered no movement on Europe's 3 top priorities: critical raw material access, regulatory transparency, and reciprocal market entry. The European Commission left with a press release and a pat on the head. Even on rare earths, where the EU is most vulnerable, Beijing didn't blink. Despite months of warnings, China's export licensing on gallium, germanium, and rare earth magnets remains discretionary. Meanwhile, Europe's domestic production remains insignificant. China controls over 90% of the EU's permanent magnet imports, essential for electric vehicles, wind turbines, and defense systems. The contradiction: the EU wants green industry independence while cutting itself off from the only country that supplies the components. It wants China to reduce overcapacity while subsidizing its own manufacturers. And it wants respect from a trade partner it penalizes with tariffs. That triangle cannot close. China's strategic timing amplified the humiliation. While EU leaders waited for a response on trade, Beijing signed a 20-year gas deal with Russia. 10 billion cubic meters annually from Sakhalin starting in 2027, on top of the 38 billion already arriving via the Power of Siberia pipeline. By comparison, Europe now pays 3 times more for imported US LNG, according to Eurostat. That energy gap is becoming lethal. Germany's industrial production fell 1.4% in the second quarter of 2025. Chemical giant BASF is closing its ammonia plant in Ludwigshafen, blaming input costs. Volkswagen is shifting battery production from Lower Saxony to Hefei, China. Siemens laid off 8,000 workers across its German operations. And yet the EU continues its high-cost decoupling strategy. Meanwhile, Hungary, still buying Russian gas, has become China's favorite EU partner. In 2024, nearly 48% of Chinese foreign direct investment to the EU went to Hungary. Chinese automaker BYD broke ground on its second Hungarian plant in June. In contrast, Chinese investment in France fell 27%. In Germany, 33%. Brussels lectures. Budapest cashes checks. Then came the appeal. Von der Leyen asked Xi to exert influence over Russia regarding Ukraine. Xi's reply? Silence. No joint statement on Ukraine. No condemnation of Moscow. Instead, China's Ministry of Commerce announced a fast-track corridor for Russian energy inputs, solidifying a pipeline Europe abandoned and China absorbed. While Europe gets stonewalled in summits, American farmers are being steamrolled in silence. In the first half of 2025, Chapter 12 bankruptcy filings hit 173, a 5-year high. According to the USDA, total U.S. farm debt is projected to reach $561.8 billion by December, surpassing 2020 pandemic-era peaks. The causes are layered. Trump's return to tariffs reimposed 25 to 30% levies on Chinese-made farm equipment. Combines, tillers, irrigation pumps. American alternatives cost more, sometimes twice as much. Many farmers delayed upgrades. Others took on debt at 7% interest. Equipment depreciated. Margins evaporated. And then came the export collapse. U.S. soybean exports to China fell 31% in the second quarter of 2025. Brazil surged 44%. Pork shipments are down. Corn is down. For Chinese importers, American farmers are now an unreliable partner. politically volatile, supply constrained, and priced out by tariffs. Trade flows are shifting, not temporarily, but structurally. Washington's response: $20 billion in subsidies and emergency relief. But most of that is being absorbed by rising operating costs. Over 60% of aid now goes toward interest service and land lease expenses, not investment. It's not stimulus. It's a stay of execution. This isn't a supply chain crisis. It's a crisis of national contradictions. Each power chasing incompatible goals while the system buckles under their weight. Donald Trump, in recent remarks, claimed he supports a strong dollar. Then, in the same breath, you make a hell of a lot more money with a weak one. His economic team is now pressuring the Fed to cut rates by 300 basis points to weaken the currency. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is already down 8.5% year to date. But the contradiction is lethal. Over half of U.S. imports are intermediate goods, semiconductors, metals, industrial components. A weaker dollar means those inputs cost more. So even if exports rise, domestic production becomes more expensive. Manufacturers get caught between higher input prices and tighter margins. Caterpillar's second quarter earnings reflect this trap. Export volume rose 6%, but material costs climbed 9.4%. Net income dropped. Ford, Boeing, and Whirlpool all issued warnings about rising procurement costs. Trump's weaker dollar boosts gross sales, but kills profitability. And there's inflation. Core CPI remains sticky above 4.1%. Food prices are rising, rent is rising, the Fed is cornered. Cut rates to weaken the dollar and risk spiraling inflation, or hold firm and watch Trump's trade agenda implode. Abroad, faith in the dollar is already eroding. Central banks in China, India, and Turkey have increased gold holdings by more than 700 tons since January. The IMF estimates that the dollar now makes up only 54% of global reserves, down from 61% in 2020. The euro, yuan, and gold are all gaining share, and investors are voting with their feet. U.S. Treasuries saw net outflows in 4 of the last 6 months. Meanwhile, demand for 10-year Chinese bonds and Eurozone energy-linked ETFs has risen sharply. No one's dumping the dollar outright, but they're definitely hedging their exit. In the middle of this mess, Trump's August 1st tariff reactivation looms. If no deals are reached, $300 billion in new tariffs will strike Chinese electronics, European tools, Indian pharmaceuticals, and Korean semiconductors. The letters have already gone out. Negotiators are scrambling. The clock is running. But here's the contradiction. Trump wants lower prices, a weaker dollar, higher exports, and tariff protection. All at once. The result? Importers face rising costs. Exporters face shrinking demand. And the middle, the U.S. manufacturing base, gets crushed between bad inputs and worse inflation. Europe, it's nowhere. ASML, its tech crown jewel, can't ship top-end lithography machines to China due to U.S. restrictions. But China made up 45% of its 2024 revenue, so it ships older models, losing competitive edge while obeying allies. It's a slow-motion surrender. The European dream of strategic autonomy remains rhetorical. Defense depends on NATO. Industry depends on China. Energy depends on American LNG. And diplomacy, as Beijing made clear, no longer commands respect. And while the West argues over tariffs and supply chains, China moves. 10 new Belt and Road ports are under construction. BRICS just added Egypt and Argentina. Yuan-denominated oil contracts are up 22%. A second digital yuan trial just launched in Southeast Asia. China didn't win by confrontation. It won by letting the contradictions play out. The EU wanted cheap imports without dependency. America wanted tariff protection without inflation. Both got neither. Beijing waited and watched. Now, with its partners fractured, China doesn't need to offer concessions. It sets terms. And when it hosts summits, it doesn't need to say no. It just waves from the window as the bus pulls up and the guests let themselves in. So what happens next? If the dollar falls another 10%, do central banks keep buying gold? If U.S. exports rise but profits vanish, do manufacturers hold on? And if the EU is neither feared nor necessary, what role does it still serve? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Can Trump get a weaker dollar without setting fire to the economy? Can Europe reclaim leverage? Or has China already stepped beyond the summit stage and started building the next order? We're glad you're enjoying this video. Please like and subscribe. Check out another video that is now on your screen.